Hi guys, welcome. If you're new here, my name's Nikki. I'm a beekeeper and I make beekeeping videos. If that's something that you like watching, hit the subscribe button. If you're one of my returning subscribers, thank you so much for coming back and listening to what I have to say. I really appreciate it. Today I'm going to do my week 11 inspection on my newest hive of honeybees. If you haven't seen the other videos in this series, I'll link them in the description below and you can check them out if you'd like. Well, I'm going to go out to the bee yard and we'll get started. All right, let's get started. I'm going to give them a little bit of smoke at the entrance. So I'm going to do a couple things this inspection a little bit differently than I would normally do. I have the honey super on that we put on before I left for vacation. I don't really expect that they've got much drawn out up here at all, if any, but we're going to take a look. We have lots of bees up here. We've got bees up here. Now I'm not going to smoke these bees. So when I do inspections with honey supers on, this hive has a queen excluder. So we know the queen's not up here. We know there's no eggs up here. Even if there's queen cells up here, she can't lay in them. So really, I don't need to look in here right away. I am going to go through it. But I'm going to do that at the end of the inspection. So I'm not going to smoke these bees. All it's going to do is push them down into the hive and make that inspection a little bit more difficult. Now one thing that I do, we are in our period of dearth. Oh yeah, lots of bees up here. So typically in dearth, a lot of times your bees are a little more defensive. They get a little crankier. So I will use sugar syrup during dearth in addition to my smoke. So I'm just going to give these girls a little spray. All it's going to do is keep them from flying around and kind of give them a little extra snack. And we'll go ahead and spray the bees up here with it. Now I'm just going to remove this super, put it to the side, and we will come back and check on that at the end of the inspection. Just kind of at first glance though, there's a pretty good amount of bees in here. If there's anything drawn out, it's not much. And again, that just keeps them from flying around. I will smoke the bees up here in this box. A lot of bees. Some of my other hives that are typically really, really gentle get more defensive during dearth. I just take the extra precaution and add the sugar syrup because it doesn't hurt them. It makes the inspection a little easier for me with less bees flying around, which makes it easier for them because I can get through it quicker. Lots of propolis up here. A lot of bees. They've got a lot more drawn out, it looks like. I think still struggling with those last couple frames. Quite a bit of bees on here. We already know we're going to find queen cells in this hive because they are bound and determined to make them. I'm just trying to keep them from swarming, especially this late in the year. And this queen does a really fantastic job, so I'd hate to lose her. So I've got a frame here of syrup. We've got some new comb that's drawn around some older comb. One little lonely drone cell. This was a frame that we moved and relocated, so it did have brood in it at one time. And on the other side, it looks like there's still capped brood and a pretty good amount of syrup. Lots of bees on here. There we have some capped brood, and on the opposite side which was once brewed, is now they're backfilling that with syrup, which I kind of want to see up here in this top box. A little over a week since I've been in here because of vacation, but I had a really nice beekeeper friend that came and refilled their feeders, and I used community feeders on the other side. So we've got, this frame was barely drawn out before, they've drawn a little more out, and it looks like they're storing syrup in there. And I've got a frame of larvae and eggs and syrup. So there we've got our frame of eggs, larvae, and syrup. And on this side, if you remember back, they kind of barely had this drawn out. They've drawn out a little bit more, and they are filling that with syrup. Now, one of the things I'm going to look at on this inspection as well is the amount of pollen that they have in here. Because we are in dirt, I want to make sure they have enough and decide whether or not I want to give them pollen patties back. Heavy frame. So I've got a frame of capped brood and some syrup around the edges, some uncapped larvae here on the bottom, and the other side is primarily syrup, a little bit of capped brood. It does look like they're backfilling this frame as well with syrup, and they have the top capped. So he's really hoping to see them start to reallocate their resources in the hive, and we talked about that in previous videos, and they are doing that. So those were brood in those cells, and now as they are emerging, they are filling them with honey or nectar and syrup, and that's a frame of capped brood. So you can see we've still got a lot of bees here, but they're really calm. They're kind of coated in that sugar syrup. So if you're a new beekeeper and you're kind of struggling with being able to get through your inspections without agitating your bees or having them kind of flying around, try adding the sugar syrup and see if that helps your inspections go a little easier. They will get preoccupied with eating that sugar syrup to be bothered with you. Frame here, that. I'm trying to see if I've got eggs in here. I don't see. I've got larvae. So larvae in these cells, it looks like they're starting to kind of backfill it a bit with some sugar syrup. I want to see more eggs. I did see a couple on the other frame. And a beautiful frame of capped brood here on this side. So we've got our frame of capped brood, and we've got a frame of pretty early larvae on the back that are not ready to be capped over yet, and kind of some sporadic cells they filled with syrup. I've got my co-star Kiwi out here with me. She has no fear of these bees. When I was getting my smoker lit, she was actually sitting on the concrete directly next to that hive and kind of peeking over the corner looking into the hive. Another thing that I'll say about the sugar syrup, and again, I use that in combination with smoke, but it helps me use my smoke less. So if I use just smoke, all I'm going to do basically is push these bees down into that bottom box, and it's going to make that inspection a little bit more difficult. I will smoke them a little bit here though. Just kind of get them away from where I got to put my fingers. And our next frame, we've got a frame of eggs. Yep, lots of eggs in here. Always checking for my queen. Let's see if that's a queen cell on the bottom. And another frame of capped brood. I wanted to check if I've got a queen cell down here, but there was a bee hanging out of it. And I do. I've got one empty queen cell here on the bottom. You can see it there. So there's our capped brood. Got a frame of eggs on this side, and you can see on the bottom I've got an empty queen cell. This hive has so much propolis, I really need to get out here and be able to clean that off. I'm going to go ahead and remove that queen cell. It's empty. And I've got eggs. Yeah, see, there's so much propolis there. And I've got, this frame feels pretty light. I've got a frame of larvae. Another empty queen cell there in the middle. And some eggs. And on this side I've got a frame of capped brood. And we've got some empty frames here in the center. I don't see any eggs in there. So here is that side, and here's our frame on the other side that's got some larvae and some eggs in it. And remove our empty queen cup. I like to congregate right here where I need to put my fingers. Girls. These last couple of frames this is a heavy frame as well. So that has a lot of beautiful capped syrup. This frame is syrup, tiny amount of pollen in here, about half of it's capped, very, very heavy. And we have another side which is beautiful syrup. So lots more nectar and syrup up here in that top box. Exactly what we want to see. As you can see here, that's all syrup and nectar that's not capped yet. And on the back, we have the same except about half of it's capped. Last inspection, all 3 of these frames back here, the last frames were empty. So we're gonna see if they've got anything started on them. And we do have this frame partially drawn out, filled with syrup, and a little bit capped. And we have nothing on the back side. So you can see that side's empty. And on this side, we have just some capped, a little tiny bit of capped syrup, and they haven't got it completely drawn out yet. I believe these last 2 are empty, but we are going to check just to make sure. All right, let's take a look at our last 2. And this frame is empty. And our last one looks empty as well. Some of these last frames, they really propolize. And this is empty as well. I'm going to go ahead and put this box back together and pull it off, and we will go over our bottom one. Okay, so I'm going to give these bees down here a little spray. And you can see there's still a lot of bees up here, or down here, but not quite as many as if we were to have smoked them down from the super all the way down to this bottom deep. We'll still give them a little bit of smoke. This outer frame was our queen cup frame that we relocated a couple weeks back. So I am always curious to see what's going to be on this frame when we get in here. Oops, sorry girls. The first frames are typically the hardest to get out, in my opinion. So here we've still got that partially drawn out comb that they haven't really drawn a ton on, but it is an outer frame. And we've got 1 empty queen cup, which is an improvement because they were building like 4 on here. And it does look like they've started to kind of repair that comb a little bit. So if you can see there, we've got the 1 queen cup there with syrup in the rest of the frame and a little bit of pollen, and that's just the back side, not really drawn out a ton. So you still have a considerable amount of bees up here in that second. But if you are doing that, be careful when you remove that box, especially if you're somebody like me that's female and not super strong. It will be heavier when you go to lift it if you don't smoke your bees down like that. This next frame was a frame they were putting queen cells on in the middle as well, and it looks like they've started to repair that area of comb. I don't see any. It is all sugar syrup and nectar on the other side that they've started capping over. So there is this side with the sugar syrup, and you can see on this side of the frame, right there in that kind of wonky center, is where they were also building queen cells and had really misshapen comb, but it looks like they're fixing that. Okay, we've got some capped brood, some eggs, larvae, and some capped syrup. And on this side, this is our frame of drone brood, and and some syrup as well. It's not a complete frame of drone brood, but there's a pretty significant amount on this frame. So there you can see the drone cells, and on this side we have some capped broods, some eggs and larvae, and some syrup. Now they have had one complete frame of bee bread or pollen. So I'm going to be looking for that down here because I want to make sure they still have enough pollen during dearth to support brood rearing for the queen. And if they don't, or I see that that supply's kind of dwindled since we're in dearth, I will add some pollen patties back for them. But prior, they were really storing a ton of pollen. I'm going to smoke you a little bit. So I don't know if you can hear the bees, if I can capture that on film, but they're very loud, and that is also a sign of dearth. So this is one of our frames of pollen, and it still has a significant amount of pollen, but some of that has been removed, and I do have some eggs that they're starting to lay, or she's starting to lay in those cells. So it does look like they are going through their pollen stores. This side I have capped brood, and still a pretty significant amount of pollen, but sporadically throughout the frame, the queen looks to be laying. So you see kind of a random larva here and there. So here is that side with our capped brood and bee bread. These entire frames before were pollen. So it looks like they are kind of depleting some of their supply. They still have a pretty good amount though. I don't see a lot of pollen on the other frames. There's been a couple that I've seen sort of sporadic cells of pollen, but nothing substantial. So if I don't see another frame like this, I don't think that's going to be enough pollen really to sustain them. And if you decide to give your bees pollen patties, some people are hesitant. It will not make your bees not go out and forage for natural sources of pollen. They prefer natural sources, so they will not take the pollen patty and not go out and forage. So they'll only take it if they need it. This is some capped brood. Also was a lot of pollen in here, which seems to be depleted, and this is capped brood now. And this side is capped brood. Okay, so I'll bring this up and show you. It's a frame of capped brood, and this frame, which used to be a lot of pollen, is now some pollen and some capped brood. Saying I need to go pick up another pair of gloves, but I haven't done it yet. I'm very fortunate that I have a commercial apiary that's within like 15 minutes of my house, and I can go get supplies from. So I sometimes tend to do everything last minute because it's so convenient to go there. Okay, this frame, I've got some pollen. So there's a pretty good amount of pollen in this frame, so I think they're going to do okay. And my queen's on this frame. She's at the bottom. It's a really, really good queen. And another frame of pollen and capped brood. It looks like the queen started to lay eggs in these cells. So as they're going through their pollen store, she's laying eggs. So she is on this side of the frame. See if you can find her. She's got a tiny amount of her dot left, and that's what this side of the frame looks like. have a really high population in this hive. I haven't seen as many eggs in here as in previous inspections, but they'll start to slow down a little bit. So I've got another frame. Oh, they're going to be fine. This is a lot of pollen here, and pollen and eggs on this side. So that's what this side looks like, and that is what this side looks like. So I think I'm correct in thinking that they are in the process of moving resources within the hive up to the top, which is what they're supposed to do. All right, let's do our last couple frames. Pretty light frame. Got a frame of, and I've got some eggs in here, some pollen and some syrup. It's kind of random. And this is the same. And ordinarily I would say this would not be a great laying pattern. But again, I think they're moving resources to the top. I've not had any issues with this queen's laying pattern in the past. So eggs, pollen, and syrup kind of sporadic on both sides of this frame. And again, a frame that we had some queen cells on. It does not look like they have built them back. Still kind of strangely drawn out. I'm hoping that they'll fix that. This is frame of mostly empty cells and some syrup. And this side just has the tiniest amount of comb on it. Just a teeny tiny amount of comb there, and that is what this side looks like. Okay, so this side we've got mostly empty cells here with a little bit of syrup. And this side is empty. So we have our empty side, and this side has a lot of empty cells, but a little bit of syrup in there. So they have made some progress on drawing out. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put this box back together. I am going to destroy the queen cup on the first frame that we pulled out, and then put my two deeps together, my queen excluder on, and then go through my honey super. Now if I don't see anything drawn out in the honey super, I'm not concerned. I'm going to leave the excluder on for this week, and if they still haven't drawn anything out, I'll pull that off for a couple days. Okay, so I've got my hive back together. My queen excluder is on. I'm just going to quickly go through this top super to see if the bees have anything started in here. Again, I don't anticipate there being much of anything. They have started to propolize a tiny bit. So our outer frame, there's nothing, which I did not think there was going to be. And instead of pulling all of these out one by one to show you that there is nothing on them, I'm just going to quickly go through, and if I see a frame that has anything drawn out, I'll pull it out. And so far I'm not seeing anything. Yeah, I think these are totally empty. So I'm going to leave it on for another week, and because they still have some room down in that other box. There's a tiny amount where they've barely started drawing. I don't even think it's enough to get it on film, just because it's such a small amount, and the wax on here is yellow to begin with, but just kind of right there in the center, there's the tiniest amount of wax. That's really hard to see. So, like I said, I'll leave that excluder on for another week so that they can keep drawing out in that second deep, those couple empty frames. And then after that, I'll remove the excluder, and sometimes that will entice the bees to come up here and draw this stuff out. But I will not leave it off for very long, because if you've watched this series, you know that this queen is kind of a beast. So if she's got an open cell up here, she's gonna lay in it. So I'm gonna just put this back together, and then we'll talk about what we saw in this inspection. Okay guys, that wraps up our inspection for week 11. Overall, really great inspection. The bees are still doing good. We saw our queen. She's still laying. I did put that honey super on for them before I left for vacation. I really didn't have any expectation that they were going to draw anything out in it, and they haven't. They still have a couple frames down in the second box that I'd like to see them draw out before they go up into the super. But likely next week when I go in, I may remove that excluder for a couple days, but not too long, because once they start drawing that out, the queen pretty much lays anywhere that she can inside the hive. Showed you a couple more tips as far as how to kind of manipulate your bees and your hive inspection during dearth, because at least for me anyways, my bees get a little bit more defensive. So I did show you a couple ways that I manage them during dearths. I hope those are helpful to you, and if you try them out, let me know how it works for you. They have started to reallocate resources in the hive, and I'm really happy to see that. So if you've watched this series before, you know that the queen was laying a lot up in the second box and not as much down in the bottom. So I was concerned about that, but decided I'd kind of watch and see where the bees went with it. And it does look like they're starting to move the resources around. There are more eggs down in the bottom now, and it does look like the brood frames up in the second deep are now being backfilled with sugar syrup and nectar. So that's really, really good to see. And also in the frames in the bottom where they have removed resources, the queen is laying in there as well. Now that is not an ideal brood pattern, but I completely believe that's why she's laying that way, and I've not had any issues with this queen in the past, so we'll just keep watching that. Other than that, guys, it was a pretty uneventful inspection. If you have any questions about this hive, this inspection, or just beekeeping in general, leave them down in the comment section below. If you found this video helpful, give it a like. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.